Welcome to another edition of the 1% Better podcast with your host, Rob O'Donoghue.
Hello folks, welcome to this week's 1% Better episode. It is a 1% Better episode after a few weeks of me, myself and EI episodes, parts of that spin-off series all around emotional intelligence. If you haven't checked it out yet, please do. There's been a lot of good, interesting feedback, mostly positive. That's never completely the case, but it's all good to hear what people are thinking. The one we released last Friday was with Dr. Tasha Yorick. She is a New York Times best-selling author and a deep dive into self-awareness. It was internal, external, all types. Fascinating, really, really good. And I would definitely say download that one straight after this one if you haven't already. Well worth a listen. And in the last week or so, I just put a post out on LinkedIn myself. I have finished up after 11 and a half years working for Dell Technologies and EMC mixed in there. And I'm now moving into a role with Gartner, which is really, really exciting. I'm going to be focusing in on a lot of the topics I talk to people about in this podcast around leadership, people development, culture, and diversity and inclusion, and certainly post-pandemic stuff. So really excited about that. And I have a few weeks now before that starts. And hopefully, all going well, still be able to do 1% Better episodes. We'll see how it all plays out. Have a lot of stuff in the pipeline anyway, so there's always going to be some content coming out. But that's an aside. The main topic for this one is about you guys and helping you potentially get back into the job market and get yourself a new role or change your role. Because this one is all about how best to prepare for interviews and how to do your research beforehand, thinking about the questions you might get asked in an interview, the do's and don'ts, a complete walkthrough of the overall process, not only the actual interviews itself, but how you can manage your wellness when you're not working, how you can put routine into your day, and then the whole applying, preparing, interview, follow-up process. All of that is in this one. Lots of questions and lots of great answers from my guest, Lorraine Shine, who I have had the pleasure of knowing for a long time and was delighted to get her on. And the timing probably couldn't be better right now, as so many folks are unfortunately in situations they mightn't have been in before, where they're now trying to get back to work where they may have been working for a long time, haven't done a CV in forever, how long, or a resume if you're a US listener. And that's the stark reality. And now this is hopefully going to provide them with some insights, some tools, some ideas that they can use. Lorraine has a background in coaching, working with people for a number of years. She set up her own business, career and interview success a few years ago, and she is absolutely best positioned to help folks in this area. Now, I will give you Lorraine Shine on interview success, CVs and career planning. Enjoy. Welcome to another 1% Better interview, and I think this one will certainly be fitting for some of the times we're in at the moment from the perspective of challenging times. You know, there's a lot of unemployment there as we're recording this. It's the middle of April. I think there's record unemployment numbers, and that probably doesn't seem to change anytime soon, but hopefully from some of the advice that comes from this one, you might have some ideas on how you could get back into the workplace when things start to pick up. My guest in this one is Lorraine Shine. She's a career coach, executive coach, corporate trainer, very much focusing on career and interview success. Lorraine, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks very much for inviting me today.
So I would say this is the first time I've had two sisters on the podcast. So your sister Amy was on at some point last year, and now yourself. Now this is in totally different focus areas, experiences slightly different. So I'm looking forward to hearing and learning from you here in this one, Lorraine.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it as well.
Great, and we'll probably get through a lot of questions because I think with anyone thinking about how to prepare for an interview, get their CV out, there's 1,000,001 questions that come up that I suppose be applicable to nearly everyone when they're going for a job interview or preparing. So lots of good stuff to come there. Let's talk a little bit about you first, though, Lorraine. Talk to me about your background, where you're coming from, how you got into this kind of specific area. I know you're a coach in general. You have I think you're ICF coach certified as well, right?
Yeah, so I have a diploma in coaching that I did in 2009 with Positive Success Group.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have some add-on diplomas after that as well.
You've kind of made the distinction more to focus in on interview success, CVs, that focus area. What brought you into that specific area?
Where it started was I did a degree in business and HR in German, actually, in UL. So it was quite a long time ago now. And after graduating, I went to Luxembourg. So I was looking for a role in the HR space. I ended up working actually for a recruitment company over there. It was mainly financial services because it's a big banking industry over there.
Mm-hmm.
The way things evolved, then I ended up staying in recruitment for a long time, for almost 18 years. I travelled with it as well. So worked in recruitment in Sydney, then came back to Dublin, and then eventually back to Cork, where I'm from originally. That was very much, a career focus area for a very long time. And then, as I mentioned, in 2009, I decided to do the diploma in coaching. So coverage a few different areas, including executive coaching. So it was through that I realised that, that was really a passion for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept on doing the coaching even when I was working full-time in recruitment, because I wanted to keep it up. I wanted to keep practicing.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose it was a matter of doing it in the evenings and weekends and things like that. Yeah, I took that approach probably for the next 8 years after that.
Mm-hmm.
And the coaching bug never really left me. And then I made that final decision to have my own business in 2019.
Like a lot of people I've talked to that have done coaching diplomas or got into coaching masters, it's really transformative. When you went through the diploma, when you look back on it now, what were the kind of aha moments for you? What was the standout things that said, wow, this is really where my sweet spot is. This is what I want to do now that I've, grown up, sort of thing. Anything come up for you there?
Yeah, so I think, going into it, I didn't realise how much work there was going to be on the self. That was really, there was a huge focus on that. And, that brought up a lot of stuff. So, that was so interesting just to, really increase your own self-awareness before you went and worked with anyone else or, coached anyone else. But I think, it's kind of one of these things I think you almost need to go through it to really realize what it is, to coach others and be coached as well. But I think what I really loved about it and what I still really love about it is that it's almost like you have to take your ego completely out of the process. So as the coach, you're there to support your client. You're there to help them. There's no hidden agenda. The only agenda that's there is what they want to do, what they want to achieve, and how you can help and support them with that. So that just sits really strongly with my own values. And it's even, I think it's hard to describe, I suppose, the feeling that you get when you walk away from a session, that kind of, it's a real feel-good factor, I think, for both parties.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose just to see, the changes that people can make, through the coaching process, whatever that is that they want to change or that they want to achieve, or, I suppose becoming even better versions of themselves.
Yeah. The word self, I actually just interviewed a lady last week, Dr. Zelda Di Blasi. She works in UCC. She's positive psychology, works in there, and we did a whole episode just on the self itself. So it'll be interesting when I get that one out. I know it probably is. It's part of this overall emotional intelligence kind of series that I'm kicking off, and I know you've got a passion for emotional intelligence. Obviously, that's a big fundamental to coaching as well. Do you see, as people develop their careers and focus in on some of the topics we're going to talk about, what parts of maybe emotional intelligence is very important in that?
I think every part of emotional intelligence is important. It's starting with the self, like, what we were just discussing there. So I think people becoming more aware of, I suppose, what their strengths and maybe what their blind spots are, and then how that can impact on, the people that they work with, people that they come into contact with every day. I think for all of us, that's a work in progress. And I think we all have blind spots as well, but emotional intelligence is it's a great tool, I suppose, for drawing awareness to those various pinch points. And I think actually it is thinking about this today, actually, just how that, that impulse control, I think that's really coming into play, I suppose, with the current situation and how we handle things as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I might ask a question around impulse control in a minute when we kind of start talking about applying for roles. But no, that's a great kind of backdrop to your own career and I suppose how we get into the next topic. It does interest me. It seems like you've always taken control of your own career. Would that be fair to say that you've kind of guided it, you've had a clear plan, a strategy to that?
I think I did, Rob. Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think I did. But having said that, it definitely wasn't an easy decision, like to go out and set up my own business, because I was coming from, a great company, really supportive, permanent, secure role with nice salary at the end of each month. And, I completely understood the risk of stepping out of that and into this kind of unknown. You don't know how much business is out there, how you're going to approach things, what's going to happen. That definitely took a number. I suppose it took a number of years, but it probably took a whole summer to decide, okay, am I going to do this or not? So while I took control, it was still, it was a tricky, decision to make, but one that I'm glad that I did make.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose as I asked that question, I'm thinking as well, this could be very applicable to somebody listening that could be in the same situation as you were, right? That you were at a point where you wanted to make your own career path and take a controlled step out and apply for something else that they already have a solid job. They want to go in a different direction. So although we started off talking about a lot of people maybe that are lost their jobs and are going back into the labour market or labour force, that this could be for people that still have a job but thinking about applying for something else. So it's kind of keeping it quite open from that point of view. All right, with all of that rambling, let's talk about people looking for a role, eager to get back into work or make a change. What are the, I suppose, initial things they should be thinking about, looking after themselves, I suppose, as a starting point?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, looking after yourself, that's a really important starting point at the moment, because we're in a very unusual situation. It's unprecedented. None of us have ever come across this before. So for someone who is about to step into, I suppose, a job search process, I think there might be, I suppose, obstacles just even within their own mindset that maybe they're for them now that may not have been maybe 6 months ago, for example. Obviously we have all the physical restrictions and things that are uncertain and outside of our control. But what I would say is that I think there are things that are within our control that we can work on. And there's certain steps that we can take both physically and I suppose mentally as well to kind of set ourselves up better for getting into that job search mindset.
Okay. And maybe can you give some examples potentially on what you could do both physically and mentally?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, you actually talked on a 1 Minute Monday recently about, the physical side. I think about, we have this, I suppose, flexibility to get out there, and we have the 2 kilometers that we can use. So whatever form of exercise is your whatever you like doing, whatever you enjoy doing. But I think it's really important that we do that on a daily basis. It's just getting out there, getting the fresh air, moving our bodies. It always makes us feel better, I think, when we get back home. So I think that's really important, the bit of physical exercise. I think sleep is really important at the moment. And, it's natural. I've, talked to a lot of friends about this as well, where you don't have to be up maybe quite as early because you don't have the commute. So you might stay up a little bit later then watching something or whatever it is, or maybe, reading, which is fine. But the thing is that we still need the same amount of sleep that we did previously, so if you're staying much later and, even if you do get to sleep in a little bit more, it will still have an impact the next day. So I think if possible, if you want to get into that positive mindset, for a job search, to make sure you're getting enough sleep to give you that bit of, extra energy and motivation the next day. It really makes a difference.
Yeah, getting a routine going, I suppose, if you're unemployed and you have you're not working, and even in this time where you're not even able to do a whole lot else, you can have so much time in your hands. It can start to overwhelm the boredom, I suppose, that can come up.
Yeah, absolutely. So, that's probably the physical side. Then I think the mental side, there's probably a number of things that are within our control as well. I would say, first of all, in terms of, social media and kind of exposure to media. And I think we've all been bombarded with that, since the start of, I suppose, the current situation. I think a lot of people have mentioned to me that they found it quite overwhelming because it's everywhere. It's the radio, it's even ads on the radio, it's social media, it's WhatsApp messages, it's everything. Like, it's really difficult to get away from it. But what I would say is that it is actually within your control, So if you even decided, okay, I'm going to go to one trusted source each day, so whatever that is for you, let's say if it's, I don't know, the RT News, and decide what time you're going to listen to that, rather than constantly checking for updates all day, or this kind of social media scrolling, which, look, we're probably all guilty of it, but it's not great mindset wise, and it can lead to more anxiety and overwhelm.
Absolutely. And I think for the month of May, I'm setting myself a challenge to kind of get really strict on how much time I spend on different social media sites. What approaches would you recommend, though, for somebody to start weaning off that, or to limit the amount of time they watch RT? I think I've watched CNN more than I've ever watched any TV show in the last month, just because, and it's just repeating every 15 minutes the same things, but we're all drawn in. How do we block it out and stick with it being out? Like, you can give it up for 3 or 4 hours. We had a no coronavirus Sunday there last week, and I was still looking forward to 6 o'clock when I was getting terrible news, but you still kind of wanted it. How do we kind of pull away?
I've heard it called Novid. You had a Novid Sunday.
Yeah, definitely. Resisted. Yeah.
So, I think, look, it depends, because I think people consume information in different ways, and some people, they're just they really enjoy social media, and that's fine. It just depends, I suppose, on what your tolerances are. But I know personally, I even started doing this in January before all of this happened, because I kind of made some, I suppose, New Year's intentions around it. But for example, with WhatsApp groups, I muted them, so I can go in and check it, but they're not showing up on the front page of my phone. I actually deleted the Facebook app from my smartphone as well, which was really hard, to be honest. That was quite painful for the first couple of weeks, because I really had that, that FOMO, fear of missing out. But I'm so glad now, because now I'm not tempted to go to my phone and check Facebook, for example. So I think it depends. Maybe even if people looked at, okay, where am I spending most of my time? So if it is on a certain social media platform, how can you maybe reduce that down then? And I think it's just tuning in and being mindful of how much time we're spending on certain platforms. Yeah.
And maybe, and I've noticed even with myself, my partner, where we would probably be, on WhatsApp or on Twitter. I'm on Twitter. She more is on WhatsApp groups, and it's kind of, we'd slag each other off a little bit about it. But you could almost set up a competition with each other to minimize it, or to kind of block it out. And sometimes, because people are naturally competitive in lots of ways, and it's kind of almost gamify it.
Absolutely. Or even just like having an accountability buddy, so if you live with someone, like that, it's just, well, how much time, did you spend on Facebook today, or how much time did you spend on WhatsApp? And there are reports you can get on your phone as well, to tell you how much screen time you had, which can be a bit scary.
It is very scary. Yeah, definitely. And it's hard to believe even that when it pops up like 3 hours or whatever per day, that's, I'd often say, like, if you're 3 hours, that you could nearly run a marathon in 4 hours. You can really reclaim so much time if you can cut it out. So
absolutely,
it builds up.
Absolutely, yeah, that's the thing. And I think there's been a lot of research done this to say that, like, what it produces in us, checking our phones, checking our social media, it produces a dopamine hit, like, which is it's very short. It's a short-lived experience, and it's not great for us if we keep going for that. It's better if we focus more on things that produce serotonin, so things that are, I suppose, not screen-based, whatever that is for you.
Yeah, no, very, very good. So there's some kind of tools or tips to try and get yourself in a good frame of mind as you're starting to apply for roles, and just in general, I suppose they don't have to be related to applying for work, but just getting yourself in a better position. I was coaching somebody not so long ago, and this kind of maybe will apply here, and they were unemployed and they were looking for new positions, and they were getting a little bit desperate, and they had said they had applied for something like 70 jobs over the course of a weekend. So it was very much a scattergun approach, just going after everything. And maybe they're getting a bit of a dopamine hit every time they send in their CV, kind of get excited that that could be. So how would you, and you're scrunching up there when I said that, so what would your thoughts be around that, and when you're starting to kind of prepare to apply for positions?
Yeah, okay. So what I would say, and I think particularly for anyone who maybe hasn't gone out searching for a job in a while, in a couple of years, it might feel overwhelming at the start, and you're thinking, oh my God, there's so many ways that I can approach this job search. Where do I start? What do I do? Like, what do I do first? So I think, try to maybe draw up like a really simple plan for yourself, and maybe even just have your top 3 priorities and start with those. And don't worry about anything else. Get through those top 3 things. Now, those top 3 things could be different, depending on what industry, what market you're coming from, what level of seniority you're at. But like what I recommend, just I suppose for, someone who's generally starting out, is first of all, if you wanted to maybe look at the job websites that are relevant to your industry and sector, and the majority of them have an area where you can go in and select, or you can set up like an email job alert to be sent to you every day. Mm-hmm. So it's really easy. Just go in, you select, the industry, the job titles you'd be interested in, the location, then what preferences you have for like part-time, full-time contract. And then these will be emailed to you on a daily basis, so you don't have to keep on going in and out of different jobs websites. So that's a really simple thing.
Mm-hmm. That definitely narrows it down.
The second thing, really simple again, I would just let your friends and family know that you're looking. But it's not just about letting them know that you're looking, it's about specifying what you would consider. So let's say, for example, if you're working in sales support at the moment, but previously you worked in maybe admin support type roles. So set out what you'd be open to considering, because a lot of the time I find that people say, oh yeah, no, I let people know that I'm looking, and then I'll ask them, okay, but what exactly did you communicate to them? And they'll say, oh, just, I'm just open for roles at the moment and I'd be able to start straight away. But it's like you have to give people the information that they could actually use to help you. So, what are the kind of roles you'd consider? If you've always worked in permanent roles, would you consider contract or temporary now, to get you back onto the jobs market? What kind of locations would you consider? Even maybe salary ranges, that type of thing, because people that will make assumptions about you, and they'll say, oh, well, look, no, he works in sales support, so he probably wouldn't consider an admin role. So it's up to us as job seekers to give that information, to people in our network.
Well, in the last few years, LinkedIn seems to be the go-to place for looking for jobs, purely because you're on it anyway, and there's a good jobs section on it. And I can't remember the last time I looked really at any other site than LinkedIn. Maybe Monster. I don't know if that even still exists, and how that has changed. Say 12 years ago, when I was probably last time I was looking for a job, it had LinkedIn probably wasn't even really up and running at that stage. So is that the best place to go, depending on what you're looking for, or what are the best sites to look for?
LinkedIn is super. It's absolutely brilliant. So if you already have a profile on LinkedIn and you already have a professional network built up, that is excellent. So definitely be going there as one of your top 3 priorities. Mm-hmm. I think what people forget about a little bit in terms of who's in their network is they forget to tap into people that they've worked with before, so ex-colleagues, and even ex-clients or ex-customers, because when you think about it, these people know you really well. They've worked with you. They probably would be really happy to recommend you for a job opportunity. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily about if you've 2,000 contacts on LinkedIn. It's not about reaching out to all of those, but reaching out to the ones who actually know you and who would recommend you.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. Creating like a logbook of... Yeah.
Rob, so there are jobs advertised on LinkedIn as well. So obviously that's another really good option.
Do you find that people are very good at kind of creating like a diary of folks that who they worked with, what their industry was in, to have that on hand? It's like, obviously we have all those connections in LinkedIn, but you probably have to scroll down through it before you would remember some of those people. But just keeping something handy in an Excel sheet of potential future employers or potential future colleagues? Is that something that is useful?
It would be really useful, but I haven't come across many people who've done it, to be honest.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. That would be really, really useful. And it's easy to do because if these people are already within your LinkedIn network, you can even search on company names. So you can see very quickly, who is there that you've worked with before. If they're people you haven't connected with, connect with them now, reestablish that relationship again.
Mm-hmm. No, very good. Maybe just to take it back even to the CV then, we're doing the job searching, but getting our resume for those folks in the US that might be listening in good shape. What does a modern day resume look like, right? I'm sure it has changed a lot, and I hire a lot of people in the project management space, and I get varying types, but they're all probably a little bit similar. So I suppose how have they changed over time? What does it look like? What should it look like?
So it will differ, because you mentioned there about, the resume in the States. So it will differ between the States, for example, and Europe, because I think with the States, the resumes tend to be a little bit shorter. Even in countries like, let's say, Germany and France, it tends to be shorter style CVs as well. Whereas in Ireland, I think we tend to go, well, I suppose Ireland and the UK, we tend to go for maybe a little bit more detail. But I think back to when I started in recruitment, have CVs essentially changed much, over those kind of 18 years? I actually don't think they have so much. But I think what has changed though is that job seekers have become a bit more savvy as to how to adapt and tailor their CV to the role that they're applying for, and I think people are starting to realize that time is really worth making that time and effort investment.
And in that, can you give me an example of what a tailored CV could look like for a project management role, or something you've seen recently that maybe popped out and you said, wow, that is well tailored and I can see why that could be attractive for a potential employer? Yeah,
absolutely. So I think the first thing is that it's really easy to spot a generic CV. So you can tell if someone has just sent out a CV that could be sent out to any organisation or to any role. So first of all, employers spot that. They know that it's pretty obvious.
Right.
So any steps that you can take to, I suppose it's really down to looking at the job spec and going through it with the fine-tooth comb and trying to identify, okay, so what in terms of the key responsibilities that are here and the key skills, experience and behaviours that this employer is looking for, what do I have? And how can I match that up? But it's about getting that across, let's say on the, the CV profile, the introduction part of your CV, and then in the body of your CV as well. So giving relevant examples that showcase your experience in that, in terms of that match with the job spec.
Okay. So give them what they're looking for in lots of ways as well, though, right? You're really creating a resume, a CV that gives the employer what they're looking for from the responsibilities that they're talking about.
Absolutely, because I suppose when you think about it from a hiring manager perspective, and particularly if you have a number of CVs to sift through, if you can read a CV where you're thinking, okay, it's quite obvious here that this person has, skill 1 to 5 that we identified in the job spec, and I don't have any question marks. I'm not kind of asking, oh, I'm not sure if they have this or they don't, because they've spelt it out that they have it and they've given solid examples. So it's really, really worthwhile doing. Not, you'd probably see it in maybe 20 to 30% of CVs.
Right. That are actually that little bit more standing out, that you can see the work has gone into it. Yeah, no, that's interesting. What about cover letters in this day and age? Is that something that is still very important to? I don't recall. I would say I looked at 100 CVs in the last 3 or 4 months, and very few, if any, had cover letters.
It does depend on the application process. Some employers may request a cover letter, others may not. I think, obviously, when one is requested, you need to provide one. If one isn't requested, it's probably very much a personal preference. And it depends as well what way you're applying. So if it's through a particular piece of recruitment software, sometimes there won't be space, or you won't have the option of attaching. a cover letter. I think if you do decide to send in a cover letter, it's important that it just hits the mark quickly. So maybe, 3 key, very concise paragraphs detailing, how you feel you're a good fit for the role in terms of skills and experience, and good opportunity actually to set out your motivation. So why are you interested in the role and why this particular organisation?
Okay. Have you seen or advised folks on doing kind of cover videos at all, or kind of using different media to apply to kind of back up their CV or resume? Anything like that come up?
I think I've seen that probably more in like maybe more the creative industry. So
Okay.
maybe like, digital marketing roles, people get really creative, like they come up with really, really imaginative stuff. Maybe for sales roles sometimes to an extent. And then I suppose like the bigger multinationals have gotten creative with their own processes themselves anyway. And sometimes they'll ask someone to create something like that as part of the process. So it depends really, I suppose, on what area you're coming from.
Okay. And then just on the recommended length of a CV. So, you hear different things all the time. And I've talked to 2 HR leaders in the last number of years, and one would say anything over 2 pages and they wouldn't throw it in the bin, and others that would be open to 4 or 5 pages. So it probably depends, but what's your experience with that?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the amount of experience that the candidate has. So, if it was someone with anything up to maybe 5 years experience, I think they should be able to keep it to 2 pages. But realistically, someone with 15 to 20 years experience, it's really challenging, I think, to keep it to 2 pages. And then, you do want to showcase your experience. You don't want to leave out really key, valuable information. So I think for someone with that level of seniority, if it goes over to 2.5, maybe 3, I think that's fine. Anything over 3, I think, is harder for the reader to digest.
And where do you stand on kind of font and size and structure of it? And even I've seen ones where certain words would be bolded and others maybe with italics, and sometimes it seems to work well, other times it just seems to be random. Any advice on how to make it look in a formatting perspective?
I think with formatting, the more simple, the better. So, just stick to the same font, a professional looking font, the same font size. I'm not a big fan of italics and bolding and things like that. Like obviously bolding for, subject, or if you're starting a new paragraph, or it's like your career summary, for example, that needs to be in bold, or key responsibilities need to be in bold. But then just bolding random words in the middle of a paragraph, I'm not sure. I think it can be a bit distracting. I just think simple is better, really, with formatting.
Mm-hmm. Okay, keep it simple. And any particular advice on just the size of font? Because again, I've seen people saying, "Well, I've put a two-page CV in, but it's been like size 8, and it could barely read it." So just kind of.
I think 10 is probably the typical one, isn't it, for most documents? Okay. I mean, I really wouldn't go down to 8 or 8.5, like where the reader can't even make it out, or they need to go in and try and edit the document themselves. And then if it's, let's say, PDF, they can't do it. So, you want to always think about the reader and make things as easy as possible for them.
Okay. Very good. Okay, so we got tactical on the CV itself. It's in great shape now. It looks really well.
Yes.
Would you put a picture on it? Have you seen somebody attaching a picture or a photo on their CV? Is that kind of useful at all, do you think?
It used to be a thing. I haven't seen it maybe in more recent years. And I think anyway, a lot of people are on LinkedIn and they have their photos on there. So look, it's probably personal preference, but I haven't seen it as much in recent years.
I guess it's probably just defunct, as you said, with LinkedIn and all the different social media stuff that we have out there.
Exactly.
So the CV is in, you've applied for it. How long should you wait now before you would hear something back from a potential employer? Maybe it varies by industry, varies probably by the level the role is at, but what's your experiences on that, guidance there?
Yeah, so I think, if you apply for a role through a recruitment agency, you can probably follow up a little bit quicker, because I think they probably sift through CVs and they have a bit more time to do that than maybe HR department, who's, involved in a number of different things. So maybe with a recruitment agency, I might give it, maybe you give it a week, maybe follow up on the same business day of the next week that you originally applied on. With employers, it's difficult to say, because I think, particularly at the moment, so much is sort of up in the air. Like if it's a really urgent role, like obviously they're going to come back sooner rather than later. If it's something that is dependent on, I suppose, the outcome of the current situation, etc., then it is going to take them a little bit longer. So I definitely I'd take that into consideration and make allowances for that. So I'd give it 2 weeks anyway, I think, at least, before following up. And I think the most important thing, though, is for job seekers at the moment, if you don't hear back within, say, 2 to 3 weeks, try and keep in that positive mind frame, and don't assume, oh, it's a no because they didn't come back to me. That may not necessarily be the case at all. They may not have come back to anyone. They're just, they're trying to follow a process themselves. Maybe the process has slowed down. But I always say to people, look, it's not a no until you officially hear it's a no.
Mm-hmm. And would you ever, when you're applying, kind of even include, is there any chance you could, what would be a reasonable time frame where I might hear back, so you can kind of ask the question that gives you some sort of boundary, at least then there's some sort of over and back potentially going?
I suppose it depends what way you're applying. I think, a lot of the applications these days are through different, types of recruitment software. So you may not get that even, you may not even have an email address or that type of kind of direct contact. But I think in terms of if you do decide to do that follow-up, like following your initial application, and you're looking for an update, I suppose, email is a good form if you can get an email address. I would just be really careful about the tone of the email, because I suppose you want to be able to reach out for an update, but in a way that you show understanding for, maybe the challenges that the organisation has at the moment. So I just, approach it very softly, and to say, maybe I sent in my application for this role through whatever website, whatever it was, on this date. And first of all, I just wanted to confirm if you received my application. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes it may not come through for whatever reason. That's just a basic thing. And then it's, just to say, we understand that maybe process may have slowed down at the moment, but if there were, maybe any initial feedback, or perhaps if you required any additional information on my profile, I'd be very happy, to supply this.
Yeah.
It was just a touching base, really, more than anything else.
Yeah, you're opening up maybe the dialogue a little bit, and not kind of asking a very direct question at that point. It's just kind of keeping things open. Yeah, makes sense. So we've got an email back and got a call from the recruiter saying, congratulations, you've been selected for interview. So we're moving along quite well here. So now we have a week to prepare for the interview. What are the kind of key focus areas that we should be looking at? That, and again, it's my first time getting an interview in 10 years. What do I need to look for and to get ready for?
Okay, so first of all, I would, recommend that you try and find out as much about the format of the interview as possible, because, there can be different styles of interview. With some interviews, they may ask you to stand up and maybe give a presentation if it's a sales role, for example, or, if it's a project management role, to do some kind of a whiteboard exercise, or, to show a methodology, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So find out as much as you can, first of all. It's almost like going back to the job spec again. I think that's a really good starting point. So going through that job spec with a fine-tooth comb, so to see, okay, so what are the key responsibilities of the role, and what have I done in the past exactly that match up with this, or that are maybe relevant to this? What skills, experience and behaviours are they looking for? And then preparing your answers around that, because they're probably going to be the likely questions, because they sat down and did up this job spec, and this is the role that they're interviewing for. So, if you're prepared based on the job spec versus your CV, that's a really good starting point.
Mm-hmm. So to work out very clear worked examples that you've had in your career, that at least then, and I know myself when I've interviewed people, if they talk about a project they've worked on, they're intimately aware of everything that happened, and you can see the emotion and the real learnings that came out of it, as opposed to them trying to make it up a little bit, because you'll get caught out if you're not being very, I suppose, genuine with examples from the experience, right?
Exactly. And I think so much of it is around those examples, Rob. So it's really thinking through, so maybe you've experienced, but it was 5 years ago, but you really need to get your thinking cap and detail that out in your preparation. So, to go through in depth, what was that example? What was that project maybe that you worked on? And what did you do? What was your part? What did you achieve? And then I suppose another thing is, if you find out that it's going to be like a behavioural or a competency interview, there's specific preparation that you can do around that in advance as well.
Mm-hmm. And it's okay to ask them very clearly beforehand, what type of interview should I expect? Can you give me more details? Because sometimes people might think, oh, maybe I'm asking too much, or they're giving me too much. It's perfectly fine to ask those questions, right?
I think so. It's probably better to be specific. So, if you were going to ask, okay, so is it likely to be a behavioural or a competency interview? Because if it is, then normally the company will send you on the behaviours or competencies, or they might be on the job spec that was advertised. So then it's actually easy enough to prepare your examples in advance using the STAR method, for those questions. That I think is, in fairness, most employers would let you know if you're expected to stand up and do some kind of a presentation or a role play. So they'll have a process in place. But if the information that you have is quite vague, I think, it's perfectly fine to ask those questions. You're not asking, okay, what questions are you going to ask me in the interview? You're just asking about what's the structure and how can you best prepare.
Okay, very good. The question of, probably the most common question, is tell me about yourself at the start of an interview. How does one prepare for that? What should they share? Should they be kind of smart about it and tie it into the role? Or, what typically would be the advice there?
It's asked so much, and I think so many people struggle with that question. So it's good that you brought it up. But I think where people go wrong with it is that they start almost, it's like a biography, and they start talking about, where they studied and their first role and their second role. And if that's not necessarily why the employer is asking it. Sometimes actually they only ask it as more of an icebreaker at the start. There isn't really a massive intention behind it. But I think it's like what you're saying, if you could be smart about it and give something that's short and concise, and just a quick summary of your background, but to tie it in as to how you are a fit for this role, or to kind of bring it around to why you're motivated to apply for this role. Mm-hmm. So it's not, they don't want to know everything that's on your CV, in that answer.
The short and concise piece is interesting, right? Again, the experience I've had is sometimes people in interviews like to just keep talking because it's filling the space and they're not comfortable maybe with the silence, and they're panicking then if they think they're not making a good impression. How do you coach people to be comfortable with just a short, concise answer and, sit back a little bit? What are the ways that they can do that? Because I think that's a big thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think it's a fine balance then as well, because we want, targeted, concise answers. Yet in some questions, employers are looking for a good bit of depth in the answer. So it's really about getting that balance. And then also we don't want, the candidate going off on a tangent and not really answering the question directly. So I think, to be honest, I suppose the way that I would coach that is really just going through examples and, getting them to answer questions. And then I suppose I would give them feedback on that. So I think really with that, it's more practice than anything else, and getting feedback from someone who's, so, not practicing it on yourself, but actually practicing it with someone else.
Sure. And I would imagine in your coaching, you do kind of mock interviews with people to kind of walk right through and, do it like a complete simulated effectively, right? So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's probably the most valuable part of that interview coaching, where you'd go through an actual simulated interview, let the person give all the answers. And kind of critiquing each answer afterwards. So, what worked really well, what could you do better? And actually, what do they think themselves? Because I think once the person reflects back, they're like, okay, no, I know I went off on a bit of a tangent there. I need to focus that. I could have talked about this instead, So it's just to do that, I suppose, that little bit of critical analysis.
Mm-hmm. Would you record one of those kind of mock interviews with a candidate that you've been working with, that to give them that powerful feedback by looking at it backward again?
Yeah, if people want to, it's, I'm completely open to it. Some people feel a little bit an element of paranoia, I suppose, with that, and then other people love that. So it just depends on the personality of the client, I guess.
Yeah, no, very good. The question around your biggest weakness, if they purposely say weakness, do you turn it around into, I talk about opportunities? You want to try and give the right answer, but not to make it sound too canned or prepared, I suppose. So that's always one that's interesting. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's another one that almost everyone struggles with, because it's, I'd almost avoid looking at, prescribed internet answers. I think it needs to be something that genuinely comes from you, because the other thing is, I think we need to remember at all times that the person who's interviewing us, or there might be a few people, it might be a panel, they're human beings. We pick up on people's energy. You can sense if someone is just, sort of repeating something that they felt looked good because they read it off the internet, or if it's something that genuinely comes from them, from their experience. So that when you want to get the balance of, talking about something that's genuine, yet obviously not using an example that would cause you, not to be a fit for the role or not to be considered. So it's something that, is genuine, but not overly negative. And then obviously turning that around, to explain how you're aware of that, what you've done to address it, and what further steps you're taking.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Yeah, no, good answer to that one. When it comes to the point where, and I'm jumping around a little bit, but when the interview is over and you're asked, do you have any questions for us? What should people be preparing for in that, having a few, that they could bring in if it feels appropriate?
Yes, I think it's really important to have some questions prepared, because, in my experience, when people don't, it's like, oh no, that's okay, I don't have any questions. It's a great opportunity, to show your motivation and your enthusiasm. And that's so, so important. It really is, because even if you have all of the technical skills, to do the role, that motivation and enthusiasm, that's not something, it's either there or it isn't. And that's a great opportunity to get that across. So again, I would just say it needs to be, if it can be something that you genuinely would like to know, that will come across best. Now, sometimes, people might have questions prepared and they were already answered during the interview. But if you really, as a candidate, try to actively listen, there should be things that are mentioned, during the course of the interview that you'd like to know more about. But obviously keeping those questions, relevant to the role and the organisation, and, not anything about salary or, when should I expect to hear back? Try to keep it to something that shows your motivation for the role.
And always, when I think about it, interviews I've done or been in, if somebody brings up something that, as you said, pops up during the interview in real time and they can turn it into a question, is impressive. That they're listening, they're thinking on their feet, they're able to kind of bring something out and put it back on the interviewers. That is powerful. So thinking about that is good.
Absolutely. And as you said, that can be even more impressive, asking questions as the interview goes on, as long as not too many either, I suppose. It's just where you really genuinely want to know. What
about the interviewer? Say before the interview, you're told this is the person that's going to be interviewing you. Can you do a bit of research on potentially that person? You don't want to go, that whole going on to LinkedIn and looking them up, and that then they're going to see that you're looking them up, and unless you have probably premium level, but it's not to be kind of being a private investigator here, but what could you do to kind of get a bit of background so that you might be able to use that to your advantage, perhaps?
Suppose you get mixed opinions on this. Like personally, I have no problem with anyone looking at my LinkedIn profile. And I think if you have a LinkedIn profile up there, it is for professional networking, it's for professional reasons. So, if I was carrying out an interview and I saw that someone had looked up my LinkedIn profile in advance, I would just think that they're very well prepared and they're doing their research. Okay, now if they were trying to look up maybe your Instagram account or something like that, I don't know. But I think definitely LinkedIn is a great place to go. And then, if it's a very senior person in the organization that's interviewing you, sometimes on corporate websites, you'll see a profile of the person on their website as well. So you can look that up.
Yeah. Or even just Google them. And I've seen videos of them presenting or talking or being interviewed and things like that are quite interesting. You can see obviously some of their interests and maybe the way they communicate, and maybe you would have heard that person's voice in the past. So then the first time you hear it, you're not maybe as thrown. So things like that, you can kind of get a rounded perspective, I think works well. Yeah,
exactly.
What about just researching on the company then as well, and what you should be prepared to answer if they ask questions on, why do you want to work for X, Y, and Z? Not to be spitting back because they've earned, revenue of 7 billion this year, and not to can it too much either. But what's your thoughts on that?
Obviously, I think you do need to look up the corporate website. It's really important, to understand the facts and the figures and, the news articles and what's going on for them. Let's say what their opportunities and challenges are. But if there are other ways that you can really think about, okay, but like, what is it specifically about this organization that attracts me? So let's say if it's, I don't know, maybe an online advertising company. So what is it about that particular online advertising company over their competitor that really attracts you to them? I think that's what employers want to see. It's like, not that you're applying for any old role with any organization in that industry. What is it specifically about them? Why do you really want to work for them?
And be genuine about it, obviously.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think you need to think that through. It's maybe not necessarily something you might get the website might trigger something, or maybe, something that they have online or on another social media platform might trigger some thoughts. Or, let's say if you look at their corporate values and maybe some of those resonate with you, but trying to make it, I suppose, a little bit more personal to you, as opposed to, well, we have this much revenue and I was really impressed with that. So to make it a bit more personal to you as a candidate.
Mm-hmm. Very good. What about some complete no-go areas in an interview from an interviewee's perspective? What are the big gotchas you've seen that you just kind of remind people not to bring up? So,
I think, people generally have a good idea, of, okay, what are the no-go areas, and particularly in relation to, not to make any, I suppose, could cause an issue within a legal context. I think most people have that common sense that they know certain things not to say. I think actually where candidates need to be a little bit more careful is towards the end of the interview, because sometimes people tend to kind of relax a bit more and they're like, oh, thank God, it's nearly over now, so I'm nearly out the door. And that's when they might actually say, because they're kind of caught off guard then, and that's when they're more likely to say something that they didn't mean to say, or that kind of somehow goes against them in a professional manner. But definitely, I think, the questions that I mentioned previously about, maybe not asking questions about the conditions of the role, like salary or working hours, or, try to keep your questions based on the role and the organisation itself. Now, I suppose it depends on what part of the process you're at, because if you're a third round interview and you do want to know, let's say if there's flexibility with working hours, that's probably okay at that point, but maybe not at the first interview.
Sure. Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And in the world we're living in now, I would imagine interviews are done more like what we're doing right now, even though we're both in Cork, we're interviewing each other or talking to each other over Skype. What's different that you need to prepare for if you're going to be doing your interview over video conference as opposed to potentially in person? Just some thoughts around that, perhaps. Some
people are already comfortable with video conferences and they do it on a daily basis with work. So that's great if that's your current situation. If it's not, so I would get practicing, basically. So let's say, for example, you get called for an interview and it's over Zoom, or it's over Skype for Business, or whatever it is, whatever platform. if you don't have the technology already installed in your laptop, I'd recommend that you install it well in advance of the interview. So not the day of the interview, there's lots going on, in terms of preparation. So a couple of days in advance, but then try and try it out with someone else. So let's say, I think, a lot of companies actually are using Zoom at the moment. Find someone, friend or family, who also uses Zoom, try it out with them. And I think for people like who maybe aren't as comfortable with video conference technology, getting used to actually seeing themselves on the screen is really important, and how they sound as well, because it's all a little bit different. And then in an interview scenario, it just can add to the interview nerves a bit. Mm-hmm. So practicing is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I presume checking beforehand with the interviewer or the HR of attire, and just because you're working from home doesn't mean you shouldn't put on your best clothes or your interview outfit, and things like that are probably important. Other things just to be cognizant of, I guess.
Absolutely, all the basics, and even things like making sure that your mobile phone number, because if there was some issue with the video conference technology, as there can be sometimes, that at least they can ring you, that you have your phone fully charged as well. You're in a quiet room, you have your laptop plugged in, on full battery, all of those things. It's probably, things that we don't need to think about as much with face-to-face.
Mm-hmm. Get all those little logistics in place for sure. So,
yeah.
No, that's cool. So like the interview's done and you shake hands and you're leaving. The post-interview kind of period, then what are some of the things you would advise somebody to say, after the interview, 5 minutes, hours, days, brain dump stuff, just kind of best practices around that? What comes up for that?
Yeah, well, I think a really good practice that people have mentioned to me that they do is, after the interview, they make their own notes. Straight afterwards, they might go for a quick coffee and make some notes, because that can be really useful for if they're invited back for a second round or whatever the next round is. So just to reflect back on what examples did they give, what answers did they give, what were they asked. So that can be really useful, or to make notes of things that were mentioned, by the interviewers. In terms of then, let's say, next stages. So I suppose most companies will give some kind of a sense at the end of the interview as to maybe what the time frame is for follow-up, or who the job seeker will hear from. So I suppose you need to just obviously follow those instructions. I think it is really, really nice if you have the email address of the person who is scheduling the interview, to send thank you email.
Okay. Yeah.
It's to be honest kind of rare these days. I don't know, you see it every now and then, but it's a really nice touch.
That was a question I was going to ask. What's your thoughts on that? Because sometimes I've got it and I thought it was nice, and sometimes I got it, it didn't feel as genuine either. So I think it probably depends on the sentiment coming out of the interview, and if you had a really good connection, as opposed to you felt it went terrible and you still sent it anyway. I don't know. It's a tricky one.
Exactly, and that could be the difference between someone who just has a template that they send to every company that they interview you with, versus someone who actually put some thought into it, and thought about the specifics of the interview, what they enjoyed, having had the interview, what their thoughts are now about the role and the organisation. So it's that tailoring again is important.
Yeah, no, definitely. So as we stand back from it, planning is so important, right? The whole way through, planning every step, looking at it as a complete process, and thinking through it, putting yourself in different scenarios, as coaches try to do with people, get them to look at things from different perspectives, gives you that more of a rounded view. Put yourself in the interviewer's shoes, I suppose, or in their seat, and kind of what would you ask them? Any other kind of key things that we maybe didn't touch on in all the steps, Lorraine, that you find very impactful or useful for the folks you might coach for interviews?
I actually think what you just mentioned there, Rob, is really key to it. So, you're going through this experience as a job seeker, as a candidate. Yet the more that you can actually try to step into the shoes of the employer, I think the more success you'll have. Now, it isn't always easy, but it's just to ask yourself that question. So, when you're preparing your CV, think about, okay, so if I was this employer and I was hiring for this role, what kind of keywords would I be looking out for on a CV? What kind of statements would impress me if I was the hiring manager? So, the more you can actually try and step into their shoes, the better. And the same applies then for the interview process as well. So thinking about what would they like to see, or even, what kind of attitudes and behaviors would you need to display in the interview, to work well in this organization.
No, definitely. Yeah, I think that is very, very true. One question I didn't ask as we were kind of going through it, but it just popped back up here. When you're looking at a job description or a job that you see advertised, you think you're maybe a 60% match or 50% match, some of the key skills, or, not just mandatory responsibilities, but, very required, desirable. You don't, however, you feel you have a bit, but you're confident that if you got in the door for the interview, you could impress them with attitude and with your motivation. What's your recommendation for somebody then if they have a 50% match of a CV? Do you kind of advise them to maybe tweak it to make it look more, or are they wasting their time in some instances, do you think?
I would say that it's good to look at the job description and try to assess what are the mandatory skills. So what are the must-haves for this employer? And hopefully they've laid it out in a way that you can see that. It's not just a jumble of 20 things that they're looking for. So I think if you fit most of the mandatory requirements, but you don't, maybe you're missing some of the desired skills or the things that are maybe a nice to have, I would definitely 100% recommend that you apply, because often these nice to have skills are things that are just, sometimes they're things that are plucked out of thin air, literally, or they're just, they're put down as part of, oh yeah, well that would be nice to have. And, but it's really the must haves that are, the really key criteria for the role. And I think, there's actually been some research done as well to say that, females are much less likely to apply for a role if they don't have all of the criteria that are set out in the job spec. Males are more likely to apply. Okay.
Well, that's where coaching comes in handy to kind of give them that motivation to actually do it and not. Yeah, I think I remember reading that as well. Some what percentage did you say? If males saw 80%, they would definitely apply, and if females saw 50%, they definitely wouldn't, or something similar to that.
I think it was even more of a differential. I think it was maybe only 10 to 20% of women would have applied. Yeah, so women are a bit tougher on themselves when it comes to applying for jobs.
Yeah, no, that's interesting to know that as well. Yeah. Lorraine, that's been fascinating. I think we've gone through a hell of a lot there, so hopefully folks listening will get something out of it. Was there anything we didn't touch?
Yeah, I think we touched on most of it, but I think just maybe going back to the job search process again, I do think that people have an awful lot going on at the moment. It is a very, I suppose it's a challenging time for everyone. So, really kind of setting out a very simple plan for yourself. And, as a job seeker, maybe if you just had a goal of do one thing each day, and if you accomplish that one task, whatever it is, applying for a certain role, or, putting your CV up on Monster, or updating your LinkedIn profile, to be happy with that. Because I think what happens is that sometimes, people think they need to sit down for 8 hours and do 8 hours of job searching and go really intense into it. And then you start to burn out and get demotivated.
Yeah, no, that's definitely great advice. If you, in a project mindset, you might have 10 tasks you're going to do before you can click apply, if you do one or two of them every day, because chances are, I know when I've done my own, your LinkedIn bio, you do it today and in a week's time you change 50% of it because new things come in. So it's not to kind of say it's ever done. It's always kind of evolving and kind of just chipping away at it is probably the best approach, right?
Exactly. And actually, and one thing I meant to mention as well, is really important to keep a track record of everywhere that you submit your CV. So, where you applied and the date, just to keep a record of it, because in a month's time, it might be hard to think back and remember, and just to kind of avoid duplication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we keep some sort of spreadsheet or a log of all the things you're applying for. Yeah, very planful. But often, like, great advice, but often the stuff we just don't do, as you said, that kind of keeps us on track if we take a few minutes every day to do that. So, Lorraine, that's been fascinating. Before we wrap up, folks can get in touch with you on your website, on email. Hopefully, from listening to this, you've given away some of the gold, but not all of it, so that, you know, other people might want to check in and learn more and get some help from you, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you probably will send a link to my website.
I will, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. All my contact details are there. So if anyone needs any help or advice with anything, I'm always here, happy to help.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'll be doing that. And you coach folks from all over, right? Not just Ireland, but internationally as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, like everywhere. I've had a client recently, the last couple of years, actually, she's a repeat client and she's based in the south of France. So every time, you know, we coach online and I can see the beautiful weather in the background. And so I suppose the good thing about coaching as well, that it can be, you know, it's not country specific, you know, it can all be done remotely. I do it face to face as well, obviously, but for people who are based outside of Cork, it's online.
Yeah, brilliant. The wonders of technology helps massively there as well. Thanks so much for doing this. I really enjoyed it. Got some good tips for myself as well if I'm starting to look in the future. And I look forward to sharing this out. So again, thanks a million, Lorraine.
Thanks so much for inviting me, Rob. It was great. Great to talk to you.
No bother. Great to see you as well. And we'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Take care. Thank you.
Hey folks, thanks so much for listening to the show. If you enjoyed it, could you please consider helping me extend the reach of the podcast that a little bit further? You can do that in a number of ways. The number one way is to subscribe on your app of choice. This helps me with the chart ranking, leading to more folks stumbling across the podcast and checking it out. You could also repost it on your social media channels. Any of them would be great. And maybe even tell a friend in person or over the phone. Pick up the phone, give them a call and tell them about the 1% Better podcast. Tell them about this episode or one that you've heard in the past. Any will do. I would really appreciate it. In the last year, we set up a 1% Better Slack community, which you can join for free and interact with me and other members of the community and improve through holding each other accountable and sharing monthly challenges. It's a lot of fun. Check it out. I'm into season 4 of this incredible journey, and the more of these interviews and solo shows that I research, record and share, the better I believe that they get, and more loaded with actionable takeaways that you can learn from. I know I've learned so much from it so far, and it's always really, really fulfilling and rewarding when I hear from you on what you took from it. So do reach out, rob@robofthegreen.ie. And of everybody that listens, 90% listen and enjoy, but only around 10% actually take action, write down takeaways and put them into practice. I am convinced that if we can move that number a bit higher, the listeners will not only make steps forward towards their goals, but they will be more fulfilled and happy and better. Change doesn't happen overnight. It is hard, but it's all about taking the first step, whatever that is for you. You can absolutely do this. Make a plan, be deliberate, take action. Don't overreach. Start with those small incremental improvements, and over time you will see great progress. It's all in the pursuit of betterness. So again, thank you so much for listening. Good luck and stay safe.